Chua Chapter 7 of the book, Betel Nuts and Other Stories by Simeon G. Silverio, Jr. He came to our neighborhood out of nowhere, a Chinese widower with 3 sons in tow. He rented a space and made a hovel between our tia Della's house, Aunt Della, and a concrete fence. With a wooden floor to sleep on and a rusty tin roof over their heads, the 4 males, a middle-aged father, and his sons ages 10 to 15, had to make do with their living accommodations in our neighborhood of Sampaloc, Manila, in the Philippines. The year was 1956. We envied the youngest son, Berto, who was our age. While we would go to school in the afternoon, he would walk the opposite way towards Trabajo Theater and spend the afternoon watching a movie. There was no truancy ordinance in Manila. Children were not forced to go to school, which was precisely what Chua, Berto's father, wanted. The 3 boys spent the day hanging around, and by 3 o'clock, their father would come home with a bag of fresh fish in one hand and a cheap Chinese wine, sihok tong, in another. The 3 would cook rice and the fish. They would eat their lunch by 4 in the afternoon and consume any leftovers for supper later. Chua would never eat dinner. By nightfall, he would be dead drunk, sprawled in the tiny space in their hovel, unmindful of the heat or the rain. The family came from Pangasinan, a province in the north. Chua's Filipina wife and the boy's mother had just passed away. Chua took her death so hard that he took to drinking, neglecting whatever small business he had. To ease the pain and loneliness brought by reminders of his wife in Pangasinan, he brought his children to Manila to start over. But the savings Chua had brought were too little for a decent place to live. After sleeping on the streets for days, they saw the small space in between the house and the fence. He asked the owner of the house, my tia Della, if they could put a wooden floor and a roof over the space where they could stay for a fee. It was extra money for my auntie at no additional expense. Besides, she felt sorry that the boys had been living in the streets after their mother had passed away. Ako bayad sa'yo, I will pay you, Chua promised her in broken Tagalog. Soon, Berto and his brothers, Eddie and Cardo, became part of our clan. Together with my maternal grandparents, aunts, uncles, and their families, we lived in the cluster of 5 houses in the area. The 3 boys became our regular playmates. Chua used his Chinese connections to make a living. In the morning, after he had gotten over his drunkenness after a long night's sleep, he would go to Blumentritt Market and visit his Chinese merchant friends. He would look for opportunities to buy and sell things and make a tidy profit at the end of the day. Chua would buy used tires and bring them to a shop where they could be used as material for slippers and other items. He would purchase scrap iron and take it to a place where they would command a higher value than his purchase price. He almost always made a profit and used the money to buy food for the family and the usual siokdong for himself. On one occasion, my mother, a public school teacher, asked Chua's permission to enroll his children in school. Chua was adamantly opposed to this idea. His friendly demeanor changed into a defiant stance, which warned do-gooders not to interfere with his family's affairs. His sons grew up without learning how to read and write. Our clan took pity on them. My grandmother, aunts and uncles, and parents would treat them with kindness. Still, the children would not accept anything from us, perhaps on strict orders from their father. Chua was so proud that he didn't want people to extend help to him and his sons. After 5 years, our houses in that Sampaloc neighborhood were demolished. The leases on the lots had expired, and everyone, including Chua and his sons, were forced to move. By that time, we were already living in an apartment on the 2nd floor of our printing press in Quiapo district in Manila. In 1960, my parents built our own house beside that of our grandmother's in Santa Mesa Heights, Quezon City. The members of the Galang clan of Sampaloc were once again together, this time in a suburban neighborhood. We had not heard from Chua and his sons for at least 7 years since our move from Sampaloc. But just like before, he just came from nowhere and appeared on my grandmother's doorstep. He was like a stray cat that would find his way back to our home. As before, he wanted to rent the space between my grandmother's house and the concrete fence. Could he build a hovel in it? He asked my grandma. She could not say no. This time, however, it was only Berto who was with Chua. His eldest son, Eddie, had married and had a family of his own. Despite his lack of education and impoverished upbringing, he was always the responsible one. Cardo, the second child, had become involved with gangs and was serving a prison term in the National Penitentiary. He committed a minor offense, but his records got lost in the prison system. Even after he had served his sentence, he was not released. He was caught in the prison red tape due to his lack of education and personal papers which his father should have provided. Cardo didn't know if he would ever get out of jail. Ironically, he was the silent and kind one among Chua's sons. And so there they were, Chua and his son Berto. Chua would go to the Blumentritt market in the morning, meet his Chinese friends, and come home at 3 p.m. with a fish in a plastic bag on one hand and a syoktong in another. Unbeknownst to him, however, his son Berto would not go hungry as he waited for his father in the afternoon. Our grandmother would feed Berto during lunchtime. By the time Berto prepared a meal with his father, he would just eat a little and save the rest for dinner. Chua's favorite was fried fish cooked in tausi sauce. The dish looked and smelled delicious during the few occasions I saw the father and son having a late lunch. In no time, Chua would drink his sayoktong and be sprawled on the floor of his makeshift hovel for the rest of the evening until it was time to wake up the next day. One Christmas season, my mother hired our male teenage cousins to work at our printing press during the school break. Many local merchants placed orders for calendars, which they would give away during the Christmas shopping period. The printing press could use an extra hand, and our cousins could use the extra money. Since he was considered part of our clan, Berto also worked for the press. For the first time in his life, he bought himself a new pair of pants, a shirt, and shoes for Christmas. That year, he would not be the only one without new attire during our clan's gathering on Christmas Day. However, when he wore his new garments that Christmas, his father got mad and inquired where he got the money for the new clothes. When he found out that his son worked in our printing press to earn the money, he railed at my mother for interfering in his son's affairs. He then ordered Berto to remove his shirt, pants, and shoes, and then cut the garments into pieces with a pair of scissors. It was a disappointing and sad Christmas Day for his son and my family. Then there was the time when Chua came home after winning money at the La Loma cockpit. He asked Berto to cook the food he brought with him and gave balato, money given away by a winning gambler as goodwill, to my grandmother and Tia Chuling, who was visiting at that time. The two were very happy for the magnanimous gesture and looked forward to enjoying their sudden wealth. But after eating, Chua felt the itch to go back to the cockpit and bet on the roosters again. He borrowed the money he gave to my grandmother and Tia Chuling, promising to double the sum upon his return. When he came back, he had lost the money, but not before saving a few pesos to buy syoktong for himself. While my grandmother and Tia Chuling lamented the money they lost, Chua was already drunk and happily sprawled on the floor of his makeshift shed. One day, Chua simply did not come home. Berto and his elder brother Eddie looked for him, but after a week of futile searching, they gave up. My Auntie Monang took Berto in. He was the same age as her son Ray, and the two had been friends since childhood. After a month, Eddie went to his aunt's place in Pangasinan and learned what happened. Chua showed up at his sister-in-law's place, visited the gravesite of his wife, and drank his usual bottle of syoktong. The next day he was seen sprawled beside the grave. He was dead. Through all those years of drinking, he was after all not able to recover from the grief of his beloved wife's death. Berto moved on, finding the security of family love in my Auntie Monang and cousin Ray. He helped with the family chores and did errands, treating our auntie like the mother he barely knew. His other brother, Cardo, was able to get out of prison a few years later. The prison authorities simply came to their senses, realizing his lack of papers was not enough justification to keep him incarcerated forever for a minor crime he had committed in his youth. Tia Monang hired a maid Susan from Pangasinan later on. Before we knew it, Susan and Berto fell in love and lived as husband and wife. Berto could not find a job because he was uneducated. Still, he made good money by working as an agent for illegal horse racing bookies during weekends. He also learned to drink to make friends and retain customers. He never learned from his father's alcoholism. The drinking took a toll on Berto, and he contracted tuberculosis. He was forced to move his family, including 2 daughters by that time, to his wife's hometown in Pangasinan to make ends meet. He would stay in the city when the horse races were held on the weekends and go home during weekdays. A few years later, he could no longer work due to his ailment. His wife and daughters were forced to do farm chores, but they could barely make enough money to survive. Since they could not afford to buy medicine for Berto or even take him to a doctor, he eventually died at the young age of 30. When I was at my parents' house in the Philippines one Christmas day, I saw 2 Chinese Filipino girls kissing the hands of my sister. It is a Filipino tradition to visit the houses of family, friends, and relatives on Christmas Day. In return, visitors receive Christmas gifts from the homeowners. The 2 looked frail and malnourished. "Maanak ni Berto iyan. They are the daughters of Berto," my sister explained. They came all the way from Pangasinan to solicit whatever Christmas gifts they could get from their father's friends. My heart broke when I saw them wearing old clothes. Just like their father before, they could not afford to wear new clothes and shoes on Christmas Day. I knew they would forever live in the perennial cycle of poverty, just like their father, Berto. While my old neighborhood is thousands of miles and years away from my present community in America, the memory of the harsh life Chua and his sons still haunts me. The only thing they were able to pass on to their children was this cycle of misery. These memories live vividly in my mind and make me wonder about the fairness of it all. And that closes the book on this matter. Subscribe to this channel to listen to more enjoyable stories like this. This is episode 7th of the YouTube channel, Our Life and Time Stories. Betel Nuts and Other Stories is published by Papyrus Books with email address papyrusbooks@yahoo.com. To order a copy of the book, go to amazon.com and enter the name of the author, Simeon Silverio, in the browser.